Now that we have our product backlog estimated, we can start to create our release plan. Remember that our product backlog, ordered by value, highest valuable things at the top. Now we have these estimates in user stories or whatever we're using. And we can think about velocity. What is velocity? Velocity is how many of these story points can we do in one sprint. So once we have our velocity, we can actually count down that number in the product backlog and plan out our future sprints. So you can see here we're using a planning velocity of 8, and we see that we'll probably be done in about 4 sprints. Notice that in sprint 2, we actually have 7 story points rather than 8, because taking the 3 from sprint 3 would actually put us over our planning velocity of 8. We don't want to plan for anything we've ever been able to do in the past. That's the empirical data part of it. Planning based on what we have been able to accomplish in the past, not what we expect to do in the future. Once you have something like this, you can start looking at those items and saying, you know, by sprint 2, we probably have something that we could release. And then you can start marking your releases on this plan as well. You might also have a hard business date. That's just the nature of business. Sometimes there's a point in time where we have to release something for all sorts of reasons. And if you do, you put that date on this plan because we know how long our sprints are, so we know about when they're going to start and stop. Put that hard date, and then you can start having a negotiation of what's above and below that line. If marketing comes in and says this thing below the line needs to really be in there in that next release, well, then we push it up. But we need to push out the appropriate amount of story points down. Because if we don't, then we're planning beyond what we've proven we can do. And that's based on empirical data. When you first start to release plan and you have a new team, you have no idea what your velocity is going to be. Velocity is an empirical measure. So usually you have to have some history with it. So you have to have something to start with. Here's one technique. So let's say you have a Scrum team of 4. You're going to do a sprint of 3 weeks. You have 45 work days. Let's put in a factor of 1/3, and a squared plus b squared equals c squared, e equals mc squared. This is ridiculous. It's going to be wrong. There is no formula for coming up with initial velocity. This team has not worked together before. They've not worked on this product before. Anything you try to use as a formula is most likely going to be faulty, but if you do it in a formula, you'll think that it's fairly accurate, and it implies a degree of accuracy that's not really there. So a technique I would recommend is get that same team together, but just show them your backlog. Have them talk about the top ones. What do you think about this one? What do you think about that one? If you had 3 weeks, how many of these do you really think you could get done? Let them discuss it, and then when they identify, well, we think we could get the top 4 done. So once the team has determined how many of these they can do in 3 weeks or however long your sprint is, simply calculate the number of story points in those stories, and then you have your initial velocity. It's probably still going to be wrong, and that's okay. As soon as you complete your first sprint, you'll actually have your first piece of empirical data. And the next sprint, you'll have even more. And so then you'll be able to start getting averages. And that's going to be better for release planning. We just talked about using velocity to create our release plan, the empirical evidence of what we've done in the past. So you need to track that. Over X number of sprints, what's been your velocity? And you can see we have a chart here. So you can take that average and use that in your planning. But you also may want to do what we call a best case and worst case scenario. You may take the worst 3 sprints you've had, the lowest number of velocity points, add that together, and that's the worst you've ever done. Then you can take the highest 3 sprints, add that together, and that's the best you've ever done. If you take those 2 velocities and put them against your plan, you'll have your best case scenario, if we operate at the best we've ever done, and your worst case scenario, if we operate at the worst we've ever done. So you have a range. If you really have to get something in, you want to make sure that you plan that using the worst case scenario and get it under the line with that average to be fairly sure that it's going to get in there. But then you can look at the future and say, if we were operating at all 4 cylinders, this is where we'll be. So I'd like to revisit the Sprint Zero concept because we've talked about several of the components in there. We've talked about creating a product vision. We talked about our initial product backlog and initial release plan. Some of the things we didn't get to talk about because they're more engineering focused and not a part of Scrum are the architectural approach and coding practices, continuous integration environments, and that small increment, which is also going to be particular to your own product backlog. But I encourage you to explore those online and other resources as well.